Hebrew congregation in the United Church of Christ. We're thankful to have you here with us. Dr. Alice offered a great reflection in our morning worship service, and we're all looking forward to her presentation this afternoon. So let me introduce Dr. Alice Rothchild, as I did this morning in the worship service. She is a physician, author, and filmmaker with a long-standing interest in human rights and social justice. She was a practicing OB/GYN physician for almost 40 years and served as assistant professor of obstetrics and gynecology at Harvard Medical School. Dr. Rothchild writes and lectures widely, blogs regularly, and has authored several books on Israel and Palestine and 2 award-winning novels for children. She was named in Feminists Who Changed America in 1963 to 1975 and was named the Peace Pioneer by the American Jewish Peace Archive. As we said this morning, welcome, Dr. Rothchild.
So thank you very much. In honor of the fact that you're honoring women, I'm going to be talking about understanding the experience of women and children through the lens of healthcare and human rights in Gaza. And I'm choosing to talk about Gaza because no one is paying attention to Gaza. Next slide. So I want to first of all offer a trigger warning. I'm going to be talking about some very difficult, painful things, and I think I want you to all be breathing and being aware of how you're responding, and to acknowledge that just hearing about this stuff is traumatic, and so you can just imagine what it is like to live through it. So just some basic facts. Since the Israeli assault on November 7th in 2023, over 72,000 Gazans have been killed, over 171,000 injured. Everybody agrees these numbers are grossly underestimated, and I'm happy to talk about why that's true in the Q&A. The majority of the people killed and injured are women, children, and elderly. So if you look at the numbers, 12% of the population has been killed, injured, or detained. This translates before the quote ceasefire, and I'm going to say quote ceasefire because there is no ceasefire. 1 child was killed every 52 minutes. And some 83 to 96% of the deaths are civilians. In terms of the amount of bombs dropped on Gaza, it's stunning. It's 8 times the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which comes out to 67 kilograms of explosives per person in Gaza. So this is a massive assault. More than 450 people have starved to death, including 147 children. 90% of the population has been displaced at least once, and there are people who've been displaced 5, 10 times. And there is still no safe place. And this, as you can imagine, was hugely disruptive to the healthcare system. So for instance, as examples, half of the vaccination centers were destroyed. There are approximately 150,000 pregnant and breastfeeding women who are urgently in need of basic nutritional support. And as you know, having adequate nutrition is critical for having a healthy pregnancy and a healthy baby. Next slide. Now, on October 10th, 2025, there was a, quote, ceasefire and prisoner exchange. Unfortunately, this is a ceasefire basically in name only. Since then, over 600 people have been killed and over 1,600 injured. The Israelis have divided Gaza north-south, so they've taken the east side of Gaza under full control, 58% of Gaza, which is a small place to begin with. This is the most fertile agricultural area, now totally under Israeli control. Bombings and demolitions continue. The crossings with Israel and Egypt are mostly closed, and actually were totally shut down when the assault on Iran started. And Gaza had a lot of NGOs working there, and the Israelis made a new requirement in terms of registration. They had to list all their workers and all this kind of invasive stuff, so that 99% of the NGOs refused to comply, and then they were closed down. If you look at what's left, 4% of the cropland is undamaged and accessible, 11% of the orchards, and 9% of the agricultural wells. particularly during the winter when there were big storms. There was massive flooding. There was raw sewerage seeping through tent communities. It was really horrific. And if you look at the damage, almost all the housing, 84% of the medical facilities, all of the educational facilities, the water, sanitation, and hygiene infrastructure have been damaged and destroyed, with over 900,000 people needing emergency shelter. So these are the people that are living in these fragile tents. People who do this kind of work estimate that it's about 50 million tons of rubble. Much of it is toxic from military detritus. And you may remember there was this thing called the Gaza Humanitarian Fund, which was basically a killing field where people attempted to get aid. That has totally collapsed. And the NGOs that were feeding people have been under assault. Many of them have been collapsed. So there's not a whole lot of help coming in. Since this, quote, ceasefire, there has been basically a trickle of food, education and medical equipment, some drugs, some reconstruction. There have been field hospitals set up. But since the war in Iran, 80% of the aid has been decreased. And as an example, 5% of the 300,000 tents promised have gotten into Gaza. Next slide. So as I said, as you can see, this is a humanitarian catastrophe, and it's not over. There are 37,000 pregnant and breastfeeding women who suffer from acute malnutrition. And when you have acute malnutrition, you can't just give someone some pita with hummus and everything's fine. You have to refeed them in a particular way so their bodies can become healthy again. There was a study that showed that 60% of kids 6 to 23 months were experiencing severe food poverty. And the kinds of things the Israelis have been denying entry into Gaza include fresh meat, educational supplies, solar panels, mobile latrines, refrigerators, water treatment parts, and tents. The World Health Organization reports that their essential medications are totally depleted. And Lancet, which is a prominent journal in the UK, noted that most of the victims were civilians, and more than 1 million life years have been lost because so many children were killed, and so their lives have been eliminated. Next slide. Now, as you can imagine, this is a particular issue for women who are pregnant. So if you look at the role of women in this society, in the past they have been largely responsible for obtaining and cooking the food, feeding their families. There's no cooking gas. They were responsible for providing clean water, hygiene, shelter. All of this is now unattainable. The healthcare system is in crumbles, and both the family and their personal safety are at risk. So this is a huge impact on women. Many women are caring for disabled family members, as well as the huge number of orphans. So people, babies were rescued, their entire family was killed, no one even knows who the baby belonged to, what their name was, and they just get taken in by a family. There's been a rise in gender-based violence, either through family pressure or with online platforms. Often this is under the guise of offering humanitarian aid. Men demand sexual favors. In turn, they'll provide aid. And what's happened is that the official channels of aid have been disrupted, so there's this informal, sort of dangerous system of online networks, and women are being systematically targeted. Many of those women are very vulnerable. They are widows, of which there are a huge number, single mothers, or displaced young women who've lost their homes and their families and their income. And one woman said, "I'd rather die than expect help from people like this." She said, "We're people with dignity." And this is a picture of Rafah, which was a big city in the southern Gaza that is adjacent to Egypt, and it was totally leveled, as you can see. Next slide. Now, pregnancy is the highest risk time for women. So there were many issues I want to review. One is mental health. As you can imagine, when you're pregnant and you're living in this kind of environment, the stressors are just unbelievable. Most women do not get prenatal care. They're being exposed to this very toxic environment. They have all these struggles to get adequate nutrition, which they don't, issues around safety and healthcare. And that is especially prominent at the time of delivery. So this is a picture of a woman who just delivered in a tent. And particularly when the war was in more upswing, women had to make a decision. Would they stay in their tent, where they likely wouldn't have any emergency care and no provider that was trained, Or would they risk going to the hospital? You could get killed on the way to the hospital. You get to the hospital, and it's completely filled with people who have been wounded and are bleeding to death, and you're sitting there in labor, delivering on the floor in a pool of blood. It's not necessarily a better option. So as an example, in the first 6 months of 2025, there were over 465 deliveries outside the hospital, some attended by trained personnel, some not. And needless to say, the birth rate has plummeted 41% over the past 3 years. Obstetricians are reporting 2/3 of pregnancies have complications. And in terms of what we call reprocide, the attack on women being able to reproduce, early on in the assault, the Israelis bombed an IVF center and destroyed 5,000 embryos. And there are currently 700,000 women and girls that lack menstrual health items. So that means for a young woman, every month is a time of embarrassment. There's no supplies. They don't know how to keep themselves clean because there's no water. It's just a real shaming moment every month. Next slide. Now, I headed this medical complications pre and post the assault to remind me to say to you that before the assault, things were pretty terrible. The healthcare system was on life support. This is a siege, so that it was very difficult to get medicines and equipment in. People were trained in Gaza. There were 3 medical schools, but it was very hard to get training beyond Gaza. So we're talking about a system that wasn't doing so well to begin with. And since the assault, there has been a massive lack of treatment for people with chronic diseases. Most of the dialysis centers were bombed. People couldn't get their medications. People who were disabled before couldn't get their disability care, and the massive amount of disabilities afterwards were very difficult to care for. They also found that there have been many infectious diseases, like a new deadly viral strain of that's COVID-like that have popped up in Gaza. There was an upswing in Guillain-Barré, which is a viral syndrome that causes paralysis, and people have chronic upper respiratory infections because of the environment they're living in and because of their nutritional status. There's also, because of the lack of hygiene, massive amounts of untreated hepatitis A. Almost everyone has watery diarrhea. Things like hypertension and diabetes have gone untreated, so all of those complications are up. And there are no testing strips. And even if you were able to get insulin for your diabetes, you have no electricity, you have no refrigerator, you can't keep the insulin cold. In terms of psychology, what psychologists are saying is that there's not like an acute trauma syndrome, there's kind of a chronic trauma fatigue where people are just emotionally numb, life has lost its meaning, there's an internal fragmentation of the ability to cope. And all of this impacts on pregnancy. So there's been a rise in spontaneous abortions, 20% preterm labor rate, increased low birth weight because if the mothers are starving, the babies are starving, more congenital anomalies because of the toxic environment, and more stillbirths. And this is in a place that values family, that is dedicated to having children. It's just a violation of everything that they hold dear. Next slide. And I keep mentioning famine, and it's important to remember that this is a man-made famine. So there are some 155,000 pregnant and breastfeeding women. When they try to get food, if they have any money, the markets are expensive, and there's a tremendous amount of food scarcity. And I should mention that the Israelis bombed the banks and the ATM machines, so that the Bank of Palestine is still working in the south, but there's nothing in the north. And even if you get money into your bank account, maybe there's a GoFundMe campaign and someone puts money in your bank account, there's no cash. So to get the money out, you have to deal with a middleman, usually an Israeli merchant or Israeli somebody who's there, and they'll take a 40-50% cut. So it's a real terrible situation. Now, prior to the partial ceasefire, when the food trucks and aid trucks would come in, they were often grabbed by hungry crowds or looted by armed gangs. And the Israeli army protected these armed gangs as part of their desire to have everything fall apart. And since the partial ceasefire, people are averaging 2 meals a day. There's no dietary diversity. And horrifically, there are miles and miles of aid trucks waiting to enter with tons and tons of food and medicine. And oftentimes they wait so long that everything goes bad or expires. Next slide. Now, there was a group of NGOs that put together a report called the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, IPC, and they make an assessment of the nutrition in Gaza. and they officially declared famine in August of last year. Now you get to phase 5 to famine when there are 3 critical thresholds that are obtained. One is extreme food deprivation, and one is acute malnutrition, and one is starvation-related death. So Gaza qualified on all 3. There was a study that showed that almost half of pregnant and breastfeeding women were malnourished last July, and that was up from 16% in March. So there was a big uptick in this. And even after the so-called ceasefire, the majority of the population continues to face high levels of acute food insecurity. In other words, not knowing where your next meal is coming. 500,000 people are facing phase 4, which is right under famine, and over 100,000 people are still facing famine. And as you can imagine, for pregnant women and newborns, they are the highest risk group for this kind of nutritional catastrophe. Next slide. So Gaza needs more than 600 trucks a day to come in, and the actual amount is far less. And what's going on in these trucks is often Israeli products and not products from humanitarian aid. And the slide on the picture on the right is at one of the checkpoints, and there are a group of Israeli women who are opposed to having humanitarian aid go in, and they're waving their flags and saying no aid for the enemy. So almost 2/3 of the pregnant women and new mothers in 2 clinics that are in the south of Gaza were malnourished in a recent study. 3/4 of Gaza was facing IPC3 levels or above. So again, this is right now in 2026. So again, this nutrition catastrophe continues. And what we know is that pregnant and breastfeeding women are at risk for death of starvation. And they looked at what happened by mid-2026. They're predicting a surge from 17,000 to 55,000 pregnant and breastfeeding women. And it's important to look at what the Israelis are not allowing in. It includes eggs, meat, fish, dairy, fruits, vegetables, nutritional supplements, and multiple other items that are high in nutrition, such as nuts and supplements for pregnant women and people with chronic illnesses. This is punitive and has nothing to do with security. Next slide. Now, you probably have heard that the hospitals and clinics were targeted, which is a violation of international law and the Geneva Conventions. So with all of the bombing, 2/3 of the hospitals were destroyed. The remainder are barely functional. They're totally over capacity. In last August, over half of the essential drugs and 2/3 of the essential disposables were at 0 stock in Gaza hospitals. Almost all of the, quote, functioning hospitals and field hospitals were once located in Gaza City, where they had most of the inpatient beds and the ICU beds, and Gaza City has been largely flattened. And if you think about the people working in these hospitals, they are completely depleted, they are overworked, and they are experiencing the same trauma and loss as their patients. So there were reports of surgeons fainting in the OR because they hadn't eaten and they were starving. And they're suffering from the same psychological trauma as well. And the other thing is that because the Israelis were targeting hospitals and they also targeted healthcare professionals, over 1,700 healthcare professionals have been killed, and then they arrested a whole bunch of them. So there are about 300 that are detained in Israeli prisons, documented, tortured, some of them tortured to death. And the other thing that's happened, this was in March, there have been severe restrictions on the essential fuel and spare parts coming into Gaza. So that's also pushing the hospitals towards imminent shutdown. It's also almost impossible to transfer a real sick patient out of Gaza. And so for obstetrical care, the midwives and the obstetricians are doing the best they can, but they're doing the best they can with very little. Next slide. Now, there was a correspondence in Lancet, that UK journal, that said that in the first 6 months of 2025, live births declined by 41%, 2,600 pregnancies ended in miscarriage, 220 intrauterine fetal death or stillborns, and 21 newborns died within 24 hours. And I don't know if you've seen the pictures. They would have, in NICUs, they would have multiple babies lined up in the same incubator because they didn't have enough incubators. Not a good thing. And they say that premature births, congenital malformations, and low birth rate were commonplace. And then they wrote, pregnant mothers experience malnutrition, repeated forced displacement, and increasingly limited access to health care, as well as dire living conditions where water, sanitation, and food are severely deficient. History will record whether the world chose to preserve Palestinian life and stop this genocide. Gaza's mothers cannot wait for a more convenient moment to claim their right to give birth safely. And they estimated the reduction in life expectancy for females was 30 years. And then they said our approach to estimating is actually very conservative, and perhaps the losses are actually much greater. And that's because a lot of the counting is done when people die. They're brought to the hospital identifies them, and they're counted. But all the people who don't get to the hospital, who are buried under the rubble, who die a month later from an infection after their leg was amputated, those people are not being counted as war dead. Next slide. And this is again from a journal article. The IPC officially declared the famine in Gaza, and what they wrote was, and this is from France 24, which is a news report out of France. Although some aid has begun to trickle into the Palestinian enclave, experts say the famine could fundamentally alter Gaza for generations to come. So famine isn't something that just happens, it affects multiple generations. Next slide. And this is a statement from UNFPA, which is their population association, and they said famine is a death sentence for pregnant and breastfeeding women and their newborn. For mothers in Gaza, it means being forced to give birth while malnourished, exhausted, and at heightened risk of death. It means their babies are born too small, too weak, or too early to survive. It means mothers unable to breastfeed because they too are starving. And if you think about it, if you're unable to breastfeed, then you have to get formula. Formula is a powder, it's expensive, you have to find it, you have to pay for it, and then you have to mix it with water. And the water is not clean. So this is a whole feeding catastrophe. And it forces mothers to make the impossible choice between which of their children to feed and which must be left to perish. 1 in 5 babies are born prematurely or underweight. 1 in 7 newborns need emergency neonatal care, which is not available. Children who survive will be marked by stunting, developmental delays, weakened immunity, and increased risk of adult chronic disease, ruining the health of Palestinians for generations. Next slide. So what's happening now is this real struggle to survive and to rebuild. There are currently 19 hospitals, 12 field hospitals, 106 primary health centers, and 116 what they call medical points that are partially functional. So some are just creeping along and some have a little more. There are currently 22 ambulances for 2.2 million people. In terms of mental health, the group I'm familiar with, the Gaza Community Mental Health Program, they have 100 active staff. They have an office in a small building. They have 5 caravans. They have 1 partly destroyed building, and they are providing psychiatric care. Because think about it, all the people with just chronic things like psychosis or schizophrenia or all those kind of big mental health disorders have been untreated for 3 years. And then you have all the people with the added trauma. The UN, which also does mental health work, they have fixed and mobile clinics. And so there are health partners continuing to deliver life-saving health services, but under very dire conditions. And there's also a big attempt to catch up on child immunization campaign, because you know there was this issue about polio resurging in Gaza. And then there are technical things going on. There's been a connection of shelters to a water line from the UAE, and there's been repair of sewage pipes in Gaza City. And so they're trying to rebuild without having the materials that they can rebuild with, so they have to recycle things. But it's all not enough. And if you think about it, Trump has this ridiculous board of peace, which no one wants to have anything to do with, and they're planning a 5,000-person military base in Gaza for the operating hub for what they're calling the International Stabilization Force. I can't imagine what this is, but it's not going to be good. And I don't know if you're aware of the company Palantir. It's a, I think, $300 billion data collection and analysis group that is used by the Israeli military, by our military. It's a very dangerous group, and it's like the people who figure out who to kill and who to target. So they now are in the headquarters in southern Israel that the US has led, and they're providing the technological architecture for tracking the delivery and distribution of aid to Gaza. So you can imagine that's going to be totally securitized. It's not going to be a good thing. And all of this is happening while no one's paying attention, because we're all paying attention to Iran, right? Because that's where the big catastrophe is. So this is why I'm talking about this, because people aren't paying attention. Next slide. Now, I've been giving you a lot of horrific facts and figures. I also want to just remind people that we're talking about human beings. So there are 2.2 million Gazans. Over half of them are under 25. It's a very young population. And I want to show you some pictures of kids that I met. They were taken either by me or by people on various delegations I was on. So next slide. So when you think of kids in Gaza, I want you to think of these kids. Next slide. 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 And next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. These are actually kids in a school for the deaf, which is an amazing school that is now in rubble. Next slide. Next slide. And next slide. So the Gaza Community Health Program was working with kids and had them draw pictures of what their lives are like. And I just want to share some of these pictures because it tells you what's going on for these kids. So if you look at them, you see that there are helicopters bombing, there are other kinds of bombs coming in, there are people bleeding on the street, dying, all sorts of things that children should not be thinking about. Next slide. This is another one where a targeted bombing of a truck full of food, more war-related issues going on, tanks coming on the picture on the left. Next slide. Again, this is, you ask a kid, draw what's going on in your life, and this is what they're drawing. Army people, houses burning up, bombs, barbed wire. Next slide. One kid wrote, "I want to live in peace." And you can see on the left there are tanks, there's the Dove of Peace, there are missiles, there's fires burning, there's an ambulance. Next slide. And, obviously this kid's heart is breaking. Next slide. So all these photos were from 2015. I had gone after the 2014 assault. So all of the children that we saw are now 11 years older and 1 war older. And people talk about their lives in terms of how many wars they've lived through. And again, I have no idea how many of these kids are alive or dead, how many of them have all their extremities, what tent they're living in. And it's very telling to think about this. Next slide. So oftentimes people will say, well, don't call it a genocide. It's not a genocide. And I do want to explain why it's important to call it a genocide. So there's an official international human rights definition of genocide. And that is any of 5 acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. That's the official universal definition. So what are the 5 acts? They include killing members of the group, that's true in Gaza, causing them serious bodily or mental harm, true, imposing living conditions intended to destroy the group, true, and preventing births, true. And with the issue of intent, if you listen to Israeli leadership and what they've been saying for 3 years about how Gazans are animals and how we need to have a second Nakba and how they're going to wipe them off the face of the earth, this is genocidal language. So this meets all of the criteria for genocide. In addition, the victims are targeted because of their real or perceived membership of a group, not randomly. And the convention further criminalizes complicity, so that's us, attempt or incitement of its commission. So we are all complicit in this genocide. Next slide. Now I think, I've been talking, I'm an old white Jewish lady, it's very important to hear the words of Gazans. Now I work with a group called We Are Not Numbers, which mentors young Gazan writers, 18 to 30, to write about their lives. And then we mentor them to make them better writers in English and help them to understand how you talk to a Western audience. So I just want to read 2 things from things that were submitted to the We Are Not Numbers group. So this is the first one. This is by Hala al-Khatib, and it's called How Trauma Became Part of Our Lives. Living in Gaza means living in a constant state of war, whether external or internal. From the very first blast, fear takes root, shaping every moment into a new trauma you must face daily. Since I was young, I have been used to hearing the sound of missiles, but this war is different. I had never known what it meant to be bombed, injured, or to lose someone. But with the genocide, these experiences have become the new normal for every Gazan. From the very beginning of the war, many of our relatives were displaced. They came to our house, my sisters, my aunts and uncles, and even distant relatives we had never met before. Our home was in al-Nusrat refugee camp in the center of Gaza. Everyone thought it was safe. There were more than 100 people in our house. The women stayed upstairs while the men remained downstairs. My father, my uncle, and my brother had to sleep in the car because no space was left inside. Only after coming so close to death did we truly understand what it meant to be alive. We stayed up late at night talking about our dreams, our plans for after the war, and the things we wanted to change in our lives. The sounds of explosions increase at night, and we were trying to distract ourselves. Deep down, we knew that every night could be our last. And then a missile struck. So in the first week of the war, on October 13th, 2023, we sat together as usual. At exactly 9 p.m., a missile from a F-16 struck directly in front of our house. Sand, stones, and shrapnel rained down on us from outside. The curtains crashed to the ground. Everything inside our home was hurled out of place. I was sitting under the window. Glass and rubble crashed into my head and body. And the essay goes on to explain their leaving, their multiple displacements, the multiple times they experienced bombing, the getting injured. I mean, it's just one page after another of trauma and more trauma and more trauma. And meanwhile, she's reading novels, she's trying to keep her spirits together, they're trying to take care of massive amounts of family members, and they keep getting bombed and displaced. And I'm going to end with the next slide, this poem also from We Are Not Numbers. And it's partly why it's important to hear the voices of people from Gaza. It's called Ink Against Erasure by Imad Eid. We write to keep our names alive, to carve our stories into time. We write not for sympathy, but to shake the dust from your conscience, not for hearts or likes, but for footsteps marching toward justice. We write because there is a hereafter, a record beyond this world, a proof before God that we spoke, not in the names of officials, but in our own names, in every tongue, millions of times. We write because we are dehumanized and we need to cry out. We are human, just like you. We write so if we die, we are not reduced to a name whispered or a number counted, but a voice remembered. So we should probably just take a moment to breathe, and then we can have a Q&A, and I'm happy to answer any questions about anything I've talked about, or Gaza, or We Are Not Numbers, or whatever you want to talk about. But I understand we need to pause a minute.
Testing. Okay. Please wait for the microphone because we want our audience on the internet to be able to hear this as well. Okay? Who wants to go first?
Dr. Rothchild, I've attended 2 other of your talks, and I keep coming back to questions. I have millions of questions, but one question
Can you talk a little louder?
One question, I have so many questions that pop up in my mind, but one question that I want to ask is, how do you cope?
How do I cope?
How do you cope? You are the one who took these pictures. You're the one who went there and you saw it. We see it on the internet. We see on TikTok. We see on Instagram. We are a little bit far removed. You are so close to the tragedy.
So some days I cope well and some days I don't. I think that partly because I have been to Gaza 4 times, I know a lot of these writers. I work with them on a weekly basis through We Are Not Numbers. I'm involved with a weekly health and human rights report through Jewish Voice for Peace. This is all like intimately in my life every day. And there's some days that I feel like, well, my job is to talk about it and to write about it and to speak about it and to, like, you know, raise hell from the rooftops kind of feeling. And there are other days when I just can't stand it. When I do the health report, I am usually so distraught, and I know what I'm going to be writing about, and you know, it's like, it's not a surprise every week what the news is. So oftentimes I just go for a walk, or I eat a very large amount of chocolate, or do something dysfunctional like that. And the other thing is that I have created a community that's supportive, that is walking with me, particularly my family, and through Jewish Voice for Peace, and the We Are Not Numbers group. So I feel like I am part of a movement that is trying to call out about this injustice. And it was very wild, because when we started, I started out as a mentor with We Are Not Numbers, and then I became the mentor liaison, so I'm the person who matches the writers with the mentors. And originally we need voices from Gaza need to be heard, blah, 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 very important. And then when the genocide started, we realized that we were documenting a genocide in real time. And that even if everything turned out absolutely horrifically awful, we had the data, and we had the voices. And whatever historical reckoning is going to come, our record will be part of that historical reckoning. And that made us even more determined, because it wasn't easy to get stories in the middle of bombing, you know. These young people are living in tents. They're often writing their essays and poetry on their smartphones. They have internet every now and then. It's shaky. You know, we're communicating by WhatsApp. I mean, at the height of the fighting, some of the mentors were just taking the texts that they received from their writers and making them into a story or a poem, because we couldn't get a full essay because people were living in such dire places. So it really became a way to deal with the horror of what's going on. But it's very hard. And there's some days that are just like, you know, there's so many things going on. We're sort of in trauma overdrive, you know, between what comes out of certain presidents' mouths, and Iran, and, you know, racism and sexism, and, you know, homophobia. And it's an amazing amount of horrible things going on. So I've sort of taken it as my personal mission, as both a Jewish person who has this country behaving, quote, in my name, which is appalling, and my country paying for all these bombs, that my job is to keep talking about Gaza and to not let people forget. Because people, I mean, look at the newspapers and what's going on the internet. You don't see a whole lot unless you're looking for it. And, but it's still a genocide going on. It's just a slow genocide. And the other thing we didn't mention, because that wasn't the topic for today, there's a similar thing going on in the West Bank. You know, Ben Gvir and Smotrich, who are these right-wing horrific people running the government, have armed all these rabid settlers who are totally racist, and they're killing Palestinians with impunity, and they're burning down their houses and running them out of villages. And I don't know if you understand, but the West Bank is divided into 3 areas. This happened with the Oslo Accord. So Area A are Palestinian cities like Ramallah, Nablus, and they are under Palestinian Authority control, totally theoretically, although the Israelis reserve the right to go in at any time and do anything. And then Area B is sort of the villages and farmland around this, where the Palestinian Authority is in charge, but the Israeli army has all the military policing stuff. And then Area C, which is 65% of the West Bank, which is under total Israeli control of everything. And so all of the settlement building has been, the Jewish settlement building has been in Area C, and now they're starting to build settlements in A and B. So this is part of running Palestinians out, annexing the West Bank, killing as many Palestinians as you can with total impunity. And, you know, that's another thing to be talking about. And they're just like, they're sometimes, it's like there were these soldiers that gang raped a Palestinian prisoner. There's a lot of torture that goes on in the Israeli prisons. And they were just gone free. They were just not convicted of anything. And they actually had a you know, celebration with Smotrich, or one of the guys, on their victory at not being convicted. I mean, I'm like, this is appalling. At first, this has nothing to do with being Jewish. This is being fascist, you know. So you got to call it out. You got to call it out. So, but some days it's just unbearable.
Okay,
but
I saw.
Community is critical.
Pardon me. I saw two hands, and so I'm going to try to go in the order in which I saw those hands, okay?
Thank you, Dr. Rothchild. Thank you for, bringing all this thing in to our attention. I was there twice. I was just sharing with you. Last year I was there, and from the Israel side, because I work for the government, and from the Egypt side. So we had some supplies, so we could not take it from the Egypt side. That was lost. That is, I'm a witness. So, but now, and I've been to West Bank, so we did channel to West Bank, so Al Hol and some other towns. Their condition is very miserable. Whatever you portrayed over here, you even did not do 10%. It's worse than that one. I'm witness myself. So now how we can channel our aid? It's a good thing that what we are doing, bringing awareness, but if I imagine the condition, I would lose my appetite for a day or two.
Right.
This happened to me,
Right.
because I have first-hand experience. So how we can send aid and all these things. Though we are raising our voices, concerned, this is very important, that on a diplomatic levels.
Sure.
But right now, over there, the women and the children, what is happening? They are our, like sisters, daughters, mothers, and all that thing. So how we can do this thing on a material side?
So sending aid is a very important thing to do. It's also very difficult to get aid in to Gaza, particularly. But there are, a host of organizations. You can still donate to UNRWA, even though the UN has largely been attacked and assaulted by Israel. There's the Middle East Children's Alliance. There's the Gaza Mental Health Program. I mean, there's a whole long list of groups. They are finding it increasingly difficult to get aid in. So from my point of view, it's important to be doing that work, but the bigger part is to be working on the US government to stop the bombing. There's been a Stop the Bomb resolution in the House of Representatives for the last couple of years, and every year more and more representatives sign on. Clearly, it's not the majority, but it's building, and I think that even American Jews are getting uncomfortable with supporting Israel, right or wrong. So we've got to change the political context, because if you send in aid and then it gets bombed, or the food spoils because the truck is sitting at the checkpoint, it didn't get where it was supposed to go. So it's the political situation has to change. And it is very clear to me that Israelis have moved to the right in a very dramatic way. I don't think you can underestimate the impact of the October 7th assault on Israelis. It just re-stimulated all this horror and fear, and the whole population moved to the right. So that the idea that they're a democratic, liberal area, they don't even care anymore. And they're kind of proud of being right-wing, which is, and the children are more right-wing than the parents, which is even more frightening. So I don't think Israel's going to save itself. So Israel's going to change when the international community forces it to change. So I think it's important to support boycott movements. It's important to support every elected person who says anything critical of Israel and gets completely attacked. It's important to defend academics that are losing their jobs because they spoke out on Israel. I mean, there's 1,000 ways to get into it, but unless the political situation changes, the aid's not going to get there the way it should. And, so you feed people and they're still living in a tent, and there's still raw sewage in front of their tent, and they still don't have medical care. There was a group called Defense of Children International that worked with child prisoners, and it was a fabulous organization. I went to Ofer prison in outside of Ramallah to visit children who'd been arrested, and it's a kangaroo court, 99% conviction rate, doing incredible work. And a couple of years ago, the Israelis went after that organization and a whole list of other phenomenal NGOs to really crush them. And last week I got a note that they were closing, that they could no longer function. So, good people are being crushed, good organizations are being crushed. So the thing we need to be doing is to really get Israel held accountable for what its actions are, because it's a real downward spiral.
Okay. I saw a hand over here. You're fine? Okay. Okay, here's a hand.
Thank you so much for speaking and for bringing this to light. Even though I feel like I'm well-read, I learned so many things from you today. My question would be, being Jewish, speaking out against all of this, how are you perceived, or how are you even maybe attacked by people in your own community for doing that?
Yeah.
Because me as a Muslim who protects and would love to speak out against Palestine and the genocide and for Palestine, I'm scared too.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't imagine how you would feel too.
So, I used to be part of a more mainstream Jewish community. My parents belonged to a conservative temple. And as soon as I started doing Israel-Palestine work, I started feeling very unwelcome. And, that was at a time, it was like the 90s, when a lot of the temples had these big banners that said, "We support Israel in her quest for peace." And I was like, no, I can't do this. Or, "We support AIPAC," which is, always call it the Jewish NRA. It's the major lobbying organization for right-wing Jews. So I left that community a long time ago. And so the Jewish community that I feel part of is the anti-Zionist Jewish community. And for me, that is Jewish Voice for Peace, which is the fastest growing Jewish organization in the country. A lot of young people, clearly anti-Zionist, clearly pro-BDS. So that's where my Jewish family is. And in my own personal life, my children fortunately listen to their mother, so we're all intact as a family. But I have tons of cousins that I will never talk to because I can't. I kind of broke with my cousins when one cousin sent me a New Year's card on Yom Kippur that said, "Peace will come when Palestinian mothers love their children as much as Jewish mothers." I was like, that's it, I'm out of here, I can't do this. So I think you pick your community. And also, I'm not someone who just wants to be in a Jewish community. My community is actually very broad. A lot of Muslims, a lot of Palestinians, a lot of progressive Christians, it's like, and I like that. I don't want to be I'm not into exclusive liberation, I'm into inclusive liberation. So that's where I run, and that's where I get my support. And I'll tell you, my 3-year-old grandson marches around going, "Fui Palestine, fui Palestine." It's so cute.
We had another question over here.
Alice, you've covered so much. It hit me emotionally. Your presentation was amazing. And it wasn't the first time I'm seeing those, but the way you presented it, the way that you personalize it, has a very special effect on people, I think. I have a lot of questions, but I want to also speak somewhat to what happens next. So most of the people that left Gaza, I presume, are in Al-Mawasi, at the camp right now. And the idea that the Israeli government wants to bring them to a certain location is taking place. So what do you think will happen to those people that are in the tents, in the camps right now? And also, both the Israeli government and the US government intend to rehab and make it into a resort of sorts. Do you think that that is possible? Yeah,
right.
Thank you.
So first of all, I don't know what the Israelis are going to do. They are talking about setting up a sort of model city in south in Rafah, which would be totally, everybody who gets into it has a place to live, but you have to be screened security-wise to get into it, and then, it'll be there'll be no money, it's all, virtual money, and it's all making sure you're only buying vegetables and not buying guns. It sounds horrific. It sounds like a totally highly securitized prison, basically. So whether they will actually do that and whether people will actually go live there because it's a place and it has water and electricity, I don't know. So far, the Trump administration has been besides being racist and fascist and all the things they are, they're also really incompetent. So that may save us for all I know. I don't know, you know, he has this whole thing that all these countries are going to come and have this board of peace. None of the countries want to pick up and do the dirty work that Israel doesn't want to do. I mean, Israel's philosophy is, you know, we break it, you fix it. And who wants to fix it, you know? So I can't read what the future's going to be, although I think we're in for a really horrible time. And I do think that that a lot depends on, you know, does Trump get to keep doing his shtick, and can we take Congress? And, you know, I don't have a whole lot of faith in Democrats, but they're less worse, and they may slow this whole thing down. You know, a lot depends on what happens with the Iran war. I don't know what's going to happen. So if Israel continues to bomb Iran and then Iran's bombing Israel, you know, it's just unbelievable to even imagine what's going to happen. But I think that whatever happens, no one's going to be paying attention to Gaza. So people are going to continue suffering. And that's the tragedy of it all. And when, you know, half of the population has food insecurity, you know, that's not a possible future. And the children are so traumatized that they're going to take a whole lifetime to recover. So I don't honestly have an idea of what's going to happen. But I do have an idea of what we need to do, which is international pressure to stop Israel, because they are the big bad actor here. And, you know, I don't in any way condone what Hamas did, but I think that Israelis don't understand that if you crush and oppress and starve and destroy people decade after decade, they will resist, and they have a right to resist. And you may not like how they resist, but they're going to resist. That's like how it works. And that doesn't seem to be in the Israeli consciousness. So this is a problem. And, you know, the other problem is that the U.S. is not right now an example of a bastion of liberty and democracy, so it's hard to then think we're going to help another country do that. But I think we're going to have to see what happens in Europe. I don't understand at all what, you know, the Saudis are thinking, or UAE, or, you know, all the other Arab-speaking countries where they're getting bombed by Iran. I mean, this is a whole new world. So much is unstable right now. I mean, clearly the bombing has to stop, and we have to start doing humanitarian aid immediately. But I just don't have a sense of, I mean, when you have a real estate agent doing the negotiations and some dingbat son-in-law, you know, it's like, it's not looking good, you know. So I don't know. I really don't understand. I don't have a prediction.
Question over here.
So we go way back, but I'm so thrilled. Alice and I went to the West Bank and Gaza for my very first time with Alice in 2005, and then went again in 2015, and I recognize those kids. And I'm just so thrilled that you are continuing to, this is a woman that has dedicated her life to freedom and liberation. So thank you for all that you do. And she is just as compelling in a full room as she is as a doctor with her patients, and it's just a marvel to watch. I've learned so much from you. But I don't have visibility into Jewish communities, synagogues, temples, but you might. What's your fingers on the pulse of all of that, aside from JVP, which is growing in numbers? Tell me what's happening. Tell me what's happening, and where are they getting? Are they communities that are able to meet us and see reality for that?
So. You know, I don't have, although I'm a member of the Jewish community, I don't spend a lot of time in temples, and I'm not particularly welcome there. And there's a huge range of opinion. So I'm going to start on the left and move right. So in Reconstructionist temples, which is the most liberal-minded of the different kinds of temples, I think there are people who get it, who are working with Palestine solidarity kind of work. But the issue of Zionism is a huge issue in even more liberal temples, because Zionism is seen as a sort of Jewish liberation movement rather than as a political movement that requires harm to Palestinians. So the big struggle, even in the most liberal-minded temples, is around the issue of Zionism. And many of us feel like you can't be a Zionist and a progressive at the same time, because Zionism is inherently racist. And for a lot of people, that doesn't fly very well. The other big issue is boycott, divestment, sanction, which in the entire Jewish community is a no-go. I mean, it's a line in the sand. You support boycott, you're out of here. So I think it really depends on the congregation, how brave the rabbis are. There are more and more young rabbis who are anti-Zionist, which is a fascinating thing. They have a lot of trouble finding jobs, which is sad. So I think there's a bit of a blend on the leftist side of, or more progressive side of Jewish temples. In the Reform and Conservative and Orthodox temples, there are different levels of reactionaryism, if that's a word. But I think there's pretty much agreement on the goodness of Zionism and the badness of boycott. The other problem is that, for instance, rabbis, are appointed by their temple. We call them machers. They're the bosses and big people in the temple, who tend to be wealthy and conservative and not politically progressive. And so rabbis are often to the left of their congregation, but they're afraid to speak out because they'll lose their jobs. So there's a lot of tension going on. I do think that, in fact, the American Jewish population tends not to be very religious. And most people, they go to a temple on Yom Kippur, and we call them Yom Kippur Jews. And that's like how they do it. And one of the issues is that they're getting increasingly uncomfortable with the behavior of the Israeli state. I mean, you don't have to be a wizard to see what's going on. And it's really sort of breaking through the walls that have been put up to prevent anyone seeing what's going on. But I still have, friends who, sort of friends, who go to Israel for a vacation, and they go hiking, and they swim in the sea, and they have a fantastic time, and they're oblivious to anything that's going on, and it's very easy to do that. And I think it's also important to know that particularly starting in '67, there was when the '67 war, that was described as an existential crisis for Israel, although historically it actually wasn't, but we won't go there. So there were a lot of American Jews who went to Israel after the '67 war in a fit of wanting to support Israel. And a lot of American Jews got very worried, and what happened was that the way to be Jewish in the United States, since people weren't religious, was to support Israel right or wrong. And I'll tell you a story. I was talking to this guy who's we call him macher, a big man in the Jewish community with a friend of mine, and she said, "Why do you have to be a Zionist to be a Jew?" And he said, "You don't understand. Israel is the religion." And that's really true. So for a lot of Jews, the way to be Jewish is to love Israel. And so to challenge that core belief is really hard in the Jewish community. But what's happened is also that after the invasion of Lebanon in 1982, is that, yeah? Israel had a big PR problem. I mean, they had a lot of other problems, but they perceived it as a PR problem. There's all the dead bodies in Shatila, Sabra and Shatila, not a pretty picture. So instead of saying some introspection, why are we invading another country and killing these people, they said, how do we help our PR? And that was the beginning of what's called Israeli Hasbara, which is propaganda. And there are millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars invested in producing positive Israeli propaganda. There are ministries in Israel, like the Ministry of Strategic Affairs and the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs, whose sole job is to surveil and monitor all of us, all speech on Israel, everything that gets published, go after anyone who criticizes Israel or says something nice about a Palestinian, and to promote how wonderful Israel is. And they are very determined, and they're very successful at doing this. And take something like the Canary Mission. The Canary Mission tracks professors and grad students and follows all their social media, all their publications, all their journals, everything, and cherry picks what you say and publishes it all on their website. And then their goal is to kill your career and make you unemployable. So, your department chair gets this note from this Jewish organization saying that you're an anti-Semite. And no one wants to be an anti-Semite, I mean, God forbid. So then you get called in, what's this about? And then, it goes before a conservative board or whatever, and you get fired. So this is actually happening every day. I mean, even I have had, was giving talks that got I arrive to do the talk, fly across to the East Coast, and discover I've been canceled. You know, this happens a lot. So there is a very concerted effort to keep Jews from knowing and to make the rules about knowing you stand with Israel. And the October 7th assault gave people more ammunition. It sort of revived the Holocaust, we're the victims of the world, anti-Semitism is the worst, racism, blah, 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 which is not. It revived that kind of old fear. So Israelis are feeling totally under attack, and they've moved to the right, and a lot of the Jewish community also moved to the right with them. So this is all, so it's like, you know, you ask 10 Jews 10 questions and you get 100 answers. This is one of those kind of answers. It kind of depends. Does someone fall over? Is she okay? Are they okay?
Is he all right?
Are we okay? Okay.
Hey, Scott.
Okay.
Are there any more questions?
I've just, when he's up and feeling better, I have one more
Okay.
thing to say.
Well, he's moving around, so.
Go ahead,
Okay.
Dr. Alice.
So
and
the other, okay,
Yeah.
my last thing is that the good news, since there is good news, is that the younger generations of Jews aren't buying it. So that they no longer have the sort of Holocaust memory of their grandparents or great-grandparents. They look around and they know what democracy looks like, they know what anti-racism looks like, they know what fighting Islamophobia looks like, and they say, well, why, if we do it in the United States, why is it okay in Israel? So one of the things that the sort of organized Jewish community is frantic about is that they're losing the younger generations. And I think that's a plus. So that's like the best news I can share with you right now.
Hang on just a second.
Yeah.
Sorry, real quick. Who are these settlers? Like what we see on TV.
Who are these settlers?
Who are they? They're young men pushing, shoving women,
Yeah.
you know.
So there are all kinds of settlers, Jewish settlers in the occupied territories. 80% of them are what are called economic settlers, people who move into nice, cheap apartments. They don't even know they're settlers. They don't even know where the Green Line is, all that kind of stuff. So there is also a incredibly fascistic branch that has existed since the founding of Israel. I mean, some of the leadership in the founding of Israel actually admired Mussolini and were actual fascists. So this is not something, if you look at the history, it's all there, it just has to flower. So these are young people who are infused with very racist, fascistic ideas, who are supported by racist, fascistic rabbis, who feel that, you know, God gave a lot of this area to the Jews, and I don't even know what boundaries, if they're going to go to the Euphrates or where they're planning to go, but their current plan is to run out all the Palestinians by killing them, taking their sheep, chopping down their olive trees, burning their houses, you know, imprisoning their children. And these people are armed by the Israeli government. They're supported by the Israeli army. I mean, I've seen this happen where the settlers are throwing stones and throwing, you know, fire things, and the army is just standing there allowing them to harm Palestinians. So these are the crazies. These are our brown shirts. These are our Nazis. And they are very, very powerful in the West Bank.
Before you speak, Pastor Felix, I'd like to say one thing. I don't like to tell people how to vote, but I'm going to ask you to vote strategically. There's a peace candidate in California who's outpolling Democrats and Republicans. He's coming in 4th place for the governorship. They found a way to kick him off the ballot. That's okay. That means our voice can be heard. And if you want to move the majors, think about how you vote.
This is a modern-day prophet. You know, when you think of Isaiah and Joel and Micah, Dr. Alice, thank you for your prophetic voice, sister.
Thank you.
And thank you for coming and then she gave a wonderful reflection in our worship service, and this speech presentation It's really profoundly moving. We wanted to hear it. We were looking forward to it, and that's not the right words because of what we are hearing about. But it's necessary, and your voice, your prophetic voice, is welcomed here. And we're going to stand with you and our Palestinian brothers and sisters, and people all around the world that defend those who have a voice but are not heard, and those who are oppressed and are not liberated just yet. So thank you for coming, folks. Thank you for being here. We're Plymouth United Church, and the doors are open to all of you. We're profoundly interfaith. There isn't only one way to God. There isn't only one way to this mystery. This mystery is so beyond one way. We're all a family, the human family, the spiritual family. Amen. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think there's still more goodies back there, okay? Thank you.
And I have books.
Okay, go. Wait.
And I also have some books. I have 2 books for kids on Palestine and a memoir that I wrote. I'm also speaking tonight somewhere. Can someone... Afshan?
Oh,
Afshan?
Cypress Creek
Is
Disciples?
it Cypress Creek? Yeah, I'm also speaking...
Asha, is it Cypress Creek
Cypress
Disciples?
Creek.
What time?
6
p.m.
Okay. It's the weaponization of anti-Semitism. And then I'm showing my documentary film on Monday. Where am I showing it? I don't know my schedule. Anyway, I'm showing a documentary film on Monday. Afshan will know where it is.
Again, okay, yeah. Cypress Creek, Disciples of Christ Christian.